Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. This is the first meetup of this year. In fact, the first event that we're doing of 2022. So thank you very much for joining. And we're going to be talking today about the ethics of mandatory vaccination. And as I was saying in the introductory words there, that this is a very fascinating topic. People have strong views, and we hope that we can get a little bit of clarity here for you in terms of the various perspectives when we're thinking about mandatory vaccination. And for that, we're going to have Professor Brad Speaker, who's the main speaker today. So Professor Brad Hooker, who's the main speaker today. And that is one of the directors of ethical reading. And he's a professor of ethics, emeritus of ethics at Reading University. I'm going to be hosting the session, and I'm Gurprit, also from Ethical Reading. So just a few words, as usual, in terms of what is Ethical Reading. We're a not-for-profit social enterprise. We launched in January 2018. Our mission is to help embed ethics into the way we do business, to make Reading a great place to live and work. And we hope that we build a community of like-minded organisations in this area, so that people want to move here because it's a more ethical place and place as a result to live and work. We want to inspire people that they can make better choices. We want to provide tools, and also one of our key aims is around collaboration. We do believe working together with like-minded organisations, we can achieve a lot more. And particularly in this area, we do run a whole bunch of events and provide some resources, really to make people think deeply about some of these issues and to share their thoughts, because it's important to engage the broad public as well as organisations in the events. I talked about collaboration, and what we do hope is, as we go forward, that what we're doing in Reading really forms a kind of a template that we can provide to other cities so that they can do similar things and get these debates and engagement across the community in terms of ethical matters. So the agenda today really is for me to hand over to Brad very shortly. Brad is going to outline the ethical issues, given that the science that we have shows that vaccinations do provide considerable protection. And after that, so we'll take about 10 minutes, what we really want to provide, the key thing here today is to provide an opportunity for people to listen to Brad, but also to share their thoughts in those breakout sessions. And I do ask that when you do that, you're respectful, you share the values of ethical reading, of being respectful and fair in terms of the time and the discussions that you have. It is quite a passionate topic, but I do hope that and do wish that you remain calm and collected, and as I said, be respectful in those discussions. Once we've had those, it'll be great to have you back and share your thoughts. So if in each of those breakout discussions, if you could nominate one particular person to share the thoughts of the group, that would be wonderful. And then we'll have a broader discussion as well. And then we'll wrap up around about 10 to 8. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my slides and hand over to Brad.
Thank you very much, Gurprit. Let me just take a sound check. Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Thumbs up. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk briefly, as Gurprit said, and the reason for it being so brief is that we think that people who are in this meeting will have a lot to say themselves, and so we want to keep a lot of time there for other people's contributions and thoughts, and I expect to learn from those. But let me just do a little bit of stage setting by starting off this way. I take it that with, at most very rare exceptions, everyone's chances of surviving the varieties of COVID that have appeared so far are far greater if this person has been vaccinated and boosted than if this person has not been vaccinated and boosted. If you catch COVID, you won't get as ill if you've been vaccinated and boosted as you would if you hadn't been vaccinated and boosted. Now, only a tiny minority of people are more endangered by the vaccine than by catching COVID. Now, you might disagree with one or more of what I've just reported, but I take it that when I'm reporting, listen, I'm not a scientist. I don't have any scientific expertise. I'm reporting what I take to be the scientific consensus. That's not to say that every scientist says that, but nevertheless, I take that to be the scientific consensus. Now, you might not agree with what I've just reported to be the scientific consensus. And even if you agree with what I've reported to be that I'm accurate in my report, you might disagree with the scientific consensus. Those are matters, it seems to me, for you to debate with somebody whose expertise is in science and not with me. That's not my area of expertise. So for the purposes of today's discussion, I'm just going to take as given that what I've reported is, in fact, what the scientific consensus is, and I'm just going to assume that the scientific consensus is correct. Now, the UK government has strongly urged everyone to whom the NHS offers a vaccination to take up the offer. The NHS aims to avoid offering the vaccination to people who are too frail or too prone to allergic reactions or in some other way for whom the vaccination is inappropriate. But as I understand it, the NHS is careful to identify who those people are and has avoided offering them the vaccination. And the government is, of course, not insisting that, or not even urging such people to get a vaccination. But that's only a small minority of people. Nevertheless, there are various other people who are refusing the offer of a vaccination. And in the face of such refusals, some organizations are considering insisting on a vaccination for employees and perhaps others like clients. Now, the ethics of mandatory vaccinations is the topic today. I'm going to leave aside the legal questions. Again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't have any expertise in the legal questions, and they're interesting. But I take it that many of us think that actually, in some sense, the moral questions come first. And really, the law should track morality, at least for the most part. I mean, there may be exceptions, but at least for the most part, the law should track morality. So the first question is, what's morally right? And then we can get on to perhaps what's legally right. Now, some people who refuse the offer of a vaccination do so because they think a vaccination is not in their best interests. I take it actually most people who refuse a vaccination refuse it because they think it's not in their best interests. Well, people are not always the best protectors of their own good. That includes me. I'm not always the best protector of my own good. And the justification for various things in society, of course, is just straightforwardly paternalistic. That's true, for example, of the requirement that people riding motorcycles wear motorcycle helmets. That's true of the requirement on all of us to wear seatbelts. And that's true, obviously, also for mandatory pension schemes. Nevertheless, like I think many other people, I want to keep paternalism from running wild. I think we should respect other people's autonomy. And so only with rare exceptions, I think, should adults be, only with rare exceptions, adults should be left to make self-regarding choices. And what I mean by that is decisions that affect only them, or at least primarily them. Now, because of the importance of autonomy, I personally would be against mandatory vaccination if its only rationale were the protection of the health of the person being vaccinated. But that's not its only rationale, because other people might be benefited by someone's getting vaccinated. Because, for example, that person's getting vaccinated helps prevent the spread of the disease, or because that person's getting vaccinated helps persuade others to get vaccinated. Now, I personally believe that mandatory vaccination will almost always be beneficial to the recipient. But the main moral reason for requiring vaccination is protection of other people, not the recipient, but other people. Now, I guess that I think things have changed a lot in the last 12, well, things have changed a lot in the last 12 months. That's obvious. 12 months ago, people who got COVID typically weren't vaccinated, and many of them, very many of them died. Scary proportion died. Now, most people are vaccinated, and if they are vaccinated and they catch COVID, which of course a lot of people still do, and perhaps a lot of you have, they typically don't get anywhere near as ill. So passing on COVID to someone already vaccinated is much less harmful than passing on COVID to someone who isn't vaccinated. And that's the big difference between now and 12 months ago. 12 months ago, if you passed on COVID to somebody, you probably passed it on to somebody who wasn't vaccinated, and that person was going to get very ill. Now, there's a good chance that if you passed on COVID, you would be passing it on to somebody who is vaccinated, and the person won't get as ill, anywhere near as ill as if the person wasn't vaccinated. So the benefit of getting vaccinated now, in terms of the benefit for other people, is much less than it was a year ago. Now, there's still self-interested reasons for getting vaccinated, according to the scientific consensus. They're still very strong, but the altruistic reasons for getting vaccinated seems to be weaker now. So if you just were weighing up self-interested reasons and altruistic reasons, the self-interested reasons are no different than they were before, but the altruistic reasons for getting vaccinated are weaker now. But then there's the question of what if you're running an organization, or what if you're helping decide policy for an organization. And so it's not a question of whether you're going to get vaccinated. It's a question of whether this organization is going to require its, say, employees to get vaccinated, or suppliers to get vaccinated, et cetera. And of course, there, especially if you're already vaccinated yourself, it's not so much a question of self-interest. Perhaps it shouldn't be a question of self-interest, but instead the interests of your employees is prominent, and the people they interact with, and the wider society. So the question is going to be, are the reasons for having everybody get vaccinated strong enough to insist on employees getting vaccinated, even if they don't want to be vaccinated? Now, I think that that's probably about right for me to stop and for us to move to the breakout sessions, because I think everybody's going to probably want to contribute at this point.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the roller coaster ride there. Going back in and out. Well, welcome back. And hope you enjoyed that session as well in terms of the discussions. My apologies. The first time I forgot to set the actual correct time in the breakout rooms. So that was the reason we went round second time. Let's get some feedback. So in group or in room one, we had Claire, Graham, Linda, Verity, and Brad, who would like to provide some sort of feedback in terms of the main topics of conversation now.
Well, to be honest, I did take careful notes. So
okay,
unless somebody else wants to go, I'm happy to report what I wrote down anyway. So Verity said that people should get vaccinated for self-preservation and to protect other people, but she thinks that the lack of government communication has been a problem, because there's lots of myths that are swirling around that are not getting countered in the government communication. For instance, why is it that 80,000 people in the NHS are not getting vaccinated? And these are presumably well-informed people. That's a good question. Stephen worried about children, and especially very young children, and different countries have taken different views about whether very young children should get vaccinated, and in particular about whether the benefit to the very young children outweighs the potential harm to the very young children. Now, Linda worked in a virology lab, and she is in a good position to assess the data, and she says that assess the information, and she's worried that a lot of it just hasn't added up. And her husband worked for Pfizer for 12 years, and he really doesn't trust Pfizer. He thinks that they're motivated by profit and not by doing good for the world. And she's also worried that spike proteins, apparently the vaccine injects us with spike proteins, or a disposition to have protein spike, and she's worried about the long-term effect of these. Claire worked as a data analyst for the NHS, but she doesn't have a medical background, but she's persuaded by the data. And she's also worried about the burden on the NHS of the unvaccinated clogging up the beds because they need to be treated with urgency. Graham's been having trouble, I think, with his audio, so we only got a very little from Graham, and perhaps I shouldn't try to summarize it because I'm not even sure I heard it correctly.
You could say, could say.
Yes, he could stick it in now. He could say now.
Yeah. No, we were just saying about the effect on individuals and families of those who are vaccinated and those who refuse to get vaccinated causes a lot of social tension, which is our personal.
So this is within families.
Yes.
Okay.
We've got a case of it where we've got vulnerable people at one side of the family, and a youngster, well, he's 28, won't get vaccinated because he's not been convinced that the statistics are accurate enough, or there's not enough proof. And he himself is not, whilst he accepts he could be infected, he still believes that he'd be okay, and that by the nature of his job, he won't be affecting other people. So it's very, very black and white.
Very interesting. Any thoughts on those opinions and views from other people in the other groups? Jim, you're trying to.
Sorry, it's interesting, the comment about Pfizer and believing that they're only motivated by profit. I haven't really got a view on that, but it's an interesting comment, and obviously it's an important part of what Ethical Reading is trying to do, is to try and encourage companies not to be just solely motivated by profit.
Indeed, and it's interesting.
It's very dangerous, isn't it? I mean, the whole big pharma conspiracy theory is a problem. But at the end of the day, you have AstraZeneca, who essentially were distributing it on a not-for-profit basis, and actually substantially paid for by the British taxpayer. You've got independent analysis and checks of all of the different trials and so on. So I would think it's pretty difficult for Pfizer, Moderna, BioNTech, AstraZeneca, all of these different companies to pull the wool over all of the eyes of all of the scientific checkers around the world. So at the end of the day, yeah, of course, Pfizer are motivated by profit. They're a company. That's what pays for their research. So I think that's someone made the point about why aren't things being, or rumours being countered. And there was a good point made on the radio the other day that if you go down the route of countering every anti-theory, you exhaust yourself, because the conspiracy theorists will always come up with another thing, But the FBI says this, yeah, well, the FBI is part of the conspiracy. So, in fact, just countering everything is a good way to totally exhaust all the resources in government. And so I think it's dangerous to follow those lines of, it's only about profit, when there are actually quite a lot of checks and balances in place in this sector.
That's a great point. Yeah, let's go to group 2, and in group 2 we had Charlotte, Gwendolina, Ian, Joanne, and Tessa. Who'd like to report back there?
I think we had Ian nominated.
Ah.
Who said that? Was that Charlotte said that? I wasn't aware that I was nominated. I'm very happy to speak. But I must admit, I'm likely to throw all sorts of things into the saucepan here, because we started off a conversation in, I don't know what the group number was, but there was myself and Nick and Ian and Tessa, and then I moved. Then the second time round, I was with Charlotte and Tessa and Gwen. And I think that was it. So apologies if I get my feedback all muddled and confused between the groups. We had a couple of interesting parts of the discussion. So in group 2, in the latter group, I think it was Tessa who was saying there are also family issues in her family, with one of her family members who is not prepared to get vaccinated. So all sorts of difficult discussions to be had, and I think that's a really interesting point, actually, that we've heard a couple of times now. Is, you know, it's easy to talk about either it should or shouldn't be mandatory, but whether it is or it isn't won't change those sorts of difficult discussions, and people hold strong views. We talked a bit about the you know, some of the issues around you know, well, if we were to make this mandatory, should we make MMR mandatory for similar reasons, you know, to protect the population and the public, and what about vaccination for travel as well? Because of course, if you travel to some places, then you have to have certain vaccination certificates in order to travel. So to some degree, it was already mandatory, depending on where you're traveling in the world, and under what circumstances. And then another point that in, I think, the first group was made was the fact that some people who are very knowledgeable and work within the industry actually feel that there hasn't been enough testing done. It's all been rushed. We don't really know whether the vaccines are safe or not. So all those sorts of issues. The one thing I would add, though, is, and it's a bit back on the issue of, you know, all the, whether it's rumours or whether it's just views, it almost doesn't matter. Because the question is, what's the alternative? So we've just come through an unprecedented period of history. We've never in our lifetimes known anything like what we've just been through. We've never had a virus that's had this sort of impact, killing hundreds of thousands of people. And so the question to me is, well, can we just carry on with that? Forget the vaccines. There's a risk. Of course there's a risk. Ultimately, it's about judging the risk, isn't it? So the only question is, should we all judge that risk as individuals for ourselves, or do we need someone to make a judgment call either for the whole of society or for groups in society? And you know, the problem with letting everybody make the decision for themselves is everybody will make a different decision and it won't work. So we'll still be vulnerable and exposed to the risk. So we'll have to carry on wearing masks for the rest of our lives. We'll have to social distance. We won't be able to travel. We won't be able to do any of the things that we were used to. So, you know, I mean, I'll stop there, but I think I know where I'm heading. And just because, to me, there's a great big dollop of common sense required. And I may be stupid. I mean, I may be an idiot, and I may not be, you know, considering all the potential downsides. But I don't like the other side. I don't like the idea of living with COVID for the rest of my life. I actually want to start to live my life again, because it's been put on hold for 2 years. And I can't be doing with putting it on a hold any longer. And what's more, I don't want anybody else to put my life on hold because they make a decision that disadvantages me. Anyway, sorry. So that wasn't really a summary, was it? That was more of a speech. I apologise. I got going, so but I carry on.
No, that's very, very interesting, you know, thoughts and perspective, and I'm sure a lot of people would agree with you there. Other thoughts on what Ian's just said?
Yeah, I would just say I think it's you're presenting a false dichotomy. I think the idea you're saying it's either everyone gets vaccinated or no one gets vaccinated. I mean, the other view is if you ask people to get vaccinated, maybe 80% of the population will get vaccinated.
Mm.
And, you know, so it's not one, you don't have to have compulsory vaccination to get the majority of people to be vaccinated. Maybe you could get a very high uptake with the right approach.
I think in the UK, we're actually doing quite well in the numbers, aren't we? I mean, I think in terms of at least 1 or 2 doses of the vaccination amongst adults, if you leave aside young people, it is there or thereabouts in terms of 80%, which is what you need for herd immunity, I think.
Mm.
So relatively, compared with other nations, we're doing okay on that front.
Is that not 80% of the over 12s? I think it drops quite a bit if you do the whole population. So maybe we're not as close as we'd like to be.
Yes. Yes.
I have to say, I don't think I bought into the idea that I mean, I wouldn't mind if I had to wear a mask for the rest of my life, but we are travelling again. We are meeting people. We are going for dinner. We are having friends round. And that's with people having choice.
Yes.
And I think that there are some things that we mandate, like seatbelts and various things like that, which aren't quite as invasive, I guess, as a vaccine. So, you know, you've got this kind of bodily autonomy, I guess, that seems to require a higher bar. So I'd be quite in favour of a more nuanced approach, really, and sort of thinking about the likelihood of you coming into contact with a more vulnerable group. Ian's point was by now the unvaccinated might be unvaccinated because they are at risk and can't have the vaccine. But I think within that group, there's also still a healthy dose of people who just don't want to have it because they need it. But yeah, definitely, I feel like there's more work to be done for sure. But I'd like to see something a bit more nuanced than an all or nothing approach.
Cool. Group 3, we had Group 3, we had Elena, Ian, Jim, and Nick. Who would like to represent that group?
Well, we were discussing compulsion, and I kind of feel it was made compulsory that I represent the group.
Okay.
So, I mean, obviously, various different points, but we live in a society, and that society confers benefits on you, and therefore there are obligations. And you know, if you take the seatbelt rule, you could argue, obviously, as people to some extent did, well, that's up to me whether I wear a seatbelt or not. But of course, if you have a car accident without a seatbelt, you attract support from a much more widespread circle of experts and friends than if you have an accident with a seatbelt on. So these things are never solely individual, because even if you say, well, it's my health, well, yeah, but if you say it's my health and don't worry, let me die, that's one thing, but that's not what people say generally. They say it's my health, leave me alone. Clearly, if they want treatment, they should be prepared to submit to some kind of obligation. You know, there's a lot of talk about human rights these days, but very little talk about human obligations. There is, you know, that aspect of it. And if no one also is, you know, people say, well, I haven't seen enough evidence, but no one is universally expert. And so if you try to say, I haven't seen the evidence, but, you know, some clever people have, and they've judged the evidence to be sufficient. And for me, this is a kind of question that is, at what level do we set this bar? You know, if you set it low, say, hey, well, I've got this new concoction I made up this morning, then obviously that bar is too low to make that compulsory. But when you've got a load of experts who've done a load of work, at some point society doesn't go round and asking every person on the street, what do you think? They defer to experts. We all do that, you know, whether it's a driving instructor, a plumber, or a surgeon. And so our society accepts the judgment of experts. And so part of the obligation of benefiting from a society is to go along with that. And so while this is not a conclusion, that arguably, if you want the benefits of a society, there are some obligations on you and some things you have to subject yourself to in order to retain those benefits. So you're in a situation where you've got compulsion, which says everyone's got to have the jab, end of story. And by the way, no one has said that people with a medical exemption should have to have a jab. So they're not part of this debate. Or equally, you could say, well, you don't have to have the jab, but if you don't, certain aspects of society will not be available to you. And of course, nightclubs is a sort of an example of that. So you've got those two different sorts of compulsion, but in any case, the point at which you apply the compulsion has to be judged on some sort of expert bar, saying, well, we now believe that what we want to do to you is sufficiently safe and non-invasive to justify the type of compulsion we're applying.
It's quite a strong argument. So thanks, Ian. Do anyone have a sort of view on that? In terms of, that's quite a, as Brad was saying, that's quite a paternalistic kind of view or approach. And Marie.
Sorry, it's not paternalistic.
I was just going to say that in terms of, I do agree with Ian, what he's saying in some ways, except to say that you can be vaccinated 3 times and you can still get COVID. And so you can still pass on. No, but you can pass it on. And your viral load, vaccinated or not, is the same as anybody unvaccinated. So it is true. No, that is true.
That's not what's
I'm a biochemist, yeah.
Okay, well, I heard some experts on the radio this week saying that your viral load is lower when you're less seriously ill.
That's what I heard. It was a professor from Reading University, actually.
That's because it's Omicron, and which has got a lower viral load. But my point on that is, and I do concur with with taking responsibilities, etc. That's fine. But actually, if I'm really concerned about the health service, and I'm really concerned about the people working in the health service, and I'm really concerned that we're going to lose this huge number of people. We're going to ruin their careers. They're going to be lost to us, etc. And yes, that's pressure on them to do the right thing or what they think is the right thing. But actually, I think, and I have to do this in my work, when I teach in a college, I have to produce a negative lateral flow test that day. I'm boosted and jabbed and everything else. But it cuts no mustard or butters no parsnips or whatever the phrase is. That doesn't matter. Nobody cares about my vaccination status in terms of me coming into contact with people. What they care about are, am I infectious today? And so, when I've heard doctors talking who haven't been vaccinated and other medical professions saying, I won't have the vaccination, but I will provide evidence that I'm not infectious today. And anybody who's had a vaccine cannot think, oh, well, I'm completely harmless. You're not. That doesn't make you harmless. So, but I do agree that we should have vaccinations. But I also agree with, we can't be so, oh, well, I'm absolutely fine then. I'm not bothered about anybody's passport, vaccine passport. I want to know, have you got a nasty cough and have you got any symptoms and have you got a lateral flow test that you can show me right now? Actually, that's what I want to know. And that's what I think vulnerable people want to know as well.
But I guess there's another trade-off implicit in that, isn't there? Which is to characterise it in an extreme and totally inaccurate way. You're either going to be testing every day for the rest of your life, or you have a vaccine. Well, I mean, at what point does it stop? Or on the other hand, you get a vaccine that means that testing is largely not necessary. So that's another trade-off in this whole debate, isn't it? At what point is the level of severity and reduced enough to be able to say, well, it doesn't matter if a few people get it, versus, well, let's not bother with all that and all of the cost of vaccination because it's not cheap, and just test every day. And then you've got the cost and the burden of testing. And
I guess my point is we've got 80% of people vaccinated, and for the numbers in the NHS now, the healthcare professionals who are refusing to have a vaccination and who will be without a job, and we've got like this absolutely huge waiting list of people who've got nothing to do with COVID and are waiting for all these things. We need all our orthopaedic surgeons, vaccinated or not. We don't want to lose them, and we need our physiotherapists, etc. We don't want to lose them. And if they say, for whatever reason, and I don't know what they are, I'm not having a vaccine, but I will not put any patient at risk because I will deliver a negative lateral flow test before I come into contact with them. That's the bit. So it's not, Ian, I'm not talking about the whole of the population in that case. I'm just saying, can we hold on to our precious NHS workers, please?
So I think, that's quite an interesting point, isn't it? Because you're in a sense, you're saying, well, 80% of the population have volunteered and given up their arms for this cause, and only because we have another partial solution called testing. You're kind of saying that therefore the argument for compulsory vaccination is weaker because we've got lots of people who've volunteered already, and those who don't want to volunteer will rely on testing. I
think there's a third.
I still have to test.
I think there's a third element to this as well, which is that, as I understand it, from the life cycle of these viruses, over time, what you tend to find is the severity goes down, the infection rate increases. And that's what we've seen with COVID, is the earlier variants were much more severe in their side effects, and over time they become more infectious but less severe. So Omicron is more infectious but less severe than the Delta variant, which was less severe than the original variant. And so if that continues, and that tends to be the trend, then what we'll find is actually quite quickly, we'll have more variants, but they'll be less severe again. And it'll get to the point, I think, eventually where this is like the cold, or it's having a severe cold. So, and that may not be that far off, given the changes we've already seen. So I think that's a third dimension in this debate, and the point that Anne-Marie makes, which is that is the health benefit, is the net benefit to society of losing 80,000 staff because of mandating them to have a vaccine? Is that in terms of reduced infections because of COVID, compared with, is that still positive compared with the fact that we're going to lose those professionals, and therefore the backlog of other issues that people have, which could be related to, all sorts of medical conditions that aren't going to be addressed? Is that net benefit overall a positive one or a negative one? I don't know the answer to that. But it will have a severe impact, and we already know that the waiting lists for NHS are astronomical at the moment. Brad, you've been very quiet. Do you want to throw anything in at this point?
Oh, I've enjoyed the conversation hugely and learned a great deal, and actually I think all the people I've heard talk know at least as much about the topic as I do. So, if not considerably more. So, no, I think I've heard a lot that I want to think about more, and a lot of things that I will never forget. So, I think it's been a very productive discussion.
Brilliant. I just recalled that actually I didn't ask the last group. So that was Anne-Marie, Colin, Willem, and Stephen. I know, Anne-Marie, you've kind of fed back some of your thinking. Perhaps the others, Colin, Willem, and Stephen, do you want to sort of say a few words in terms of your thoughts on the matter?
So the vaccine should actually be, ideally in an ideal world, to be a matter of freedom of choice. But we don't, unfortunately, live in an ideal world. And furthermore, as assuming in theory everybody had to be vaccinated or willingly be vaccinated, maybe in time to come we could lick this pandemic and start getting back to normal. But this is purely a theoretical perspective.
Thank you, Colin. Tessa, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, just a comment, really. Just what about the fact that they're saying that the immunity given by the vaccine is only lasting 10 weeks, and therefore we would have to have continuous compulsory vaccination or mandatory vaccination of the whole population? How, from a practical point of view, can the NHS sustain that? It just, it's another issue around the whole thing of mandatory vaccine. And that's just a comment. I just want other people thought about that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, the actual antibody count does decline over time. That's why we need the second boost and then the second jab and the boost and so on. So, that is yet another dimension. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. As I was saying, this is a fascinating topic, and there is a lot of different aspects to it. I particularly liked the thought from Charlotte, which actually I think perhaps a more nuanced approach in terms of where we are, in terms of going forward, particularly around people who are more vulnerable in vulnerable situations and protecting them, whilst at the same time allowing people to have more of a choice is the right balance. It's difficult in this situation. There are many considerations to take into account, and I hope that we've explored some of those with you today. I hope you've enjoyed it. We certainly have. And if you have time, please do go to our website, ethicalreading.org.uk, have a look around and look at our events that are coming up. Perhaps become a member. We'd love you to join. And if you're particularly interested, we're always on the lookout for volunteers. So if you'd like to join us there, and of course, we're on social media, so follow us on that too. But with that, have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to the next one.